Welcome to Your Mythology Book Club. I'm your host, Daniel. In this series, we're covering the Iliad, that foundational piece of Western literature that has drawn in casual readers and scholars alike for millennia. I've read the Iliad countless times and want to share my love and enthusiasm for it with you. In each episode of this series, we'll thoroughly explore one book of the Iliad until we've covered all 24 of them. I'll be reading the most critical parts to you from the 1883 edition by Lang, Leaf, and Myers, which you can read for free online. Despite being pretty dated with its archaic, bombastic language, or maybe because of it, this is the translation that began my love for the Iliad, and I hope it does the same for you. You'll find this translation linked in the show notes. You'll also find links to a few more modern translations online in the show notes that you might discover are smoother reads for you if you're reading along with the podcast, as well as links where you can order a physical copy of the book if that's how you prefer to read. Throughout this series, I'll go on tangents to explain some of the more confusing cultural aspects and frequent references to other myths that can make it difficult for the modern reader to understand the characters' motivations. These tangents will help you follow the story more easily and appreciate the very human drama at its heart. The conceit of this podcast is that we're a book club here to discuss the most recent chapter or book of the Iliad that we've all just read. But please don't think that you absolutely have to read the Iliad to enjoy this podcast series. Since I'll be reading the most critical passages out loud, including all of the dialogue, you'll hear every single important part. To the extent that we're imagining this is a book club, you could cheat and show up to the podcast without having read the latest chapter. Or you could listen to the podcast before reading that book, and maybe a pre-listen will help you prep for your reading. Whether you choose to read along or not, by listening to this series, you'll develop a deep understanding and appreciation for how exciting, moving, and really beautiful this very ancient story is. Who am I? I'm a self-taught mythology enthusiast. I've always been a heavy reader, but my tastes had been indiscriminate for most of my life. I started reading Greek mythology seriously several years ago while on a trip to Greece. I had been in the habit of reading some about the mythology, culture, and history of each country I visited. But the mythology and history of ancient Greece pulled me in and never let me go. Greek mythology is densely interwoven, intricate, full of resonances with our modern lives. I've read a lot of the primary sources, those writings that survive from the ancient world: Homer, Hesiod, Euripides, Thucydides, and so on. And I've read numerous modern works on ancient Greek mythology, culture, history, and religion. Honestly, I've become kind of obsessive, learning everything I can about the world of ancient Greece. I've even planned an upcoming trip to Magna Grecia, that region of southern Italy which was heavily settled by the Greeks in ancient times, and which still has some of the best preserved ancient Greek temples left standing. As for the Iliad, I read it 2 to 3 times a year, and although I try to read different translations, I have my favorites that I tend to repeat. I have a lot of strong feelings and ideas about the Iliad, and especially about what's going on inside Achilles' heart, and I'll share my thoughts with you as this podcast continues. Before we get into the Iliad itself, I'm going to give you a 2-paragraph crash course to set the stage on the Iliad's background. Paragraph 1 will be, why are the Greeks and Trojans at war? Paragraph 2 will be, why are the gods involved in the Trojan War? The purpose of this crash course is to provide you with the mythological knowledge that the narrator of the Iliad expects readers to have. It will be a lot of information, densely packed, but by the end, you'll be ready to dive into this ancient epic with me. Why are the Greeks and Trojans at war? At the opening of the Iliad, it's 9 years into the war. We find the Greeks camped outside the walls of Troy. They have laid waste to much of the surrounding countryside and neighboring cities and villages which the Trojans formerly controlled, and the Greeks have the Trojans bottled up within their city. This is all in an effort to retrieve Helen, former wife of Menelaus. Helen was either kidnapped by the Trojan prince known as Alexandros, who also goes by the name Paris, or she may have gone willingly with him. Whether Helen went willingly or not isn't made clear in this version of the story, nor would it have mattered to the Greeks, many of whom were oath-bound to defend Menelaus' marriage to her. Why were the Greeks oath-bound to defend the marriage of Menelaus to Helen? For that answer, we have to go back before the war. The story of the marriage of Menelaus and Helen survives in some works, like the Fabulae of Hyginus, which is one of our few really complete sources of mythology from ancient times. Helen, being famed as the most beautiful woman and the princess of Sparta, had many of the unmarried leading men of Greece converging on her father's home, seeking to marry her. Helen's father Tyndareus was worried that the situation was going to get out of control. Depending on the source, he had between 12 and 36 young men all showing up in Sparta, clamoring to marry Helen. Tyndareus had a real problem. Choosing the right husband could gain him a powerful ally, but choosing against so many others would saddle him with a whole lot of enemies. There really was no good solution for Tyndareus. Among these many suitors, initially, was Odysseus. I say initially because while he was in Sparta, Odysseus met another woman, Penelope, the daughter of Tyndareus' brother Icarios. Since Odysseus ends up setting his sights on Penelope, whom he would go on to marry, Odysseus doesn't really have anything to lose by bowing out of the competition, and he came up with a plan to help Tyndareus out of his predicament. The thing with Odysseus' plans is that they're sometimes a little too clever, or they have consequences he didn't really think through. As with most myths, there are variants. And with the marriage of Helen to Menelaus, some variants leave the selection of her husband up to chance. But I prefer the one found in Hyginus Fabulae number 78, in which Helen got to choose who to marry. But before she made her choice, all the men were required to swear an oath to defend the marriage, uphold her choice, no matter which of them she chose. Tyndareus and the suitors agreed to the plan, and the suitors all swore their oath to defend Helen's choice. Helen chose Menelaus, brother of the powerful king Agamemnon of Mycenae. They wed, and Menelaus became king of Sparta as her husband. Everything worked out fine, or so it seemed. But the oath, it hung over everyone, this obligation that could come due at any moment. The mortal Greek world was all lined up for a fight, and all it would take is for a foolish young Trojan to kidnap, or entice, Helen to come with him to Troy, and the war would break out. Now, why are the gods involved in the Trojan War? In addition to the Greek and Trojan worlds being divided, the divine world was also all lined up for a fight. The conflict over Helen ignited the mortal conflict. To understand what triggered the divine conflict, we have to go back a generation to the wedding of the mortal man Peleus and the goddess Thetis, the parents of the greatest Greek warrior and central character of the Iliad, Achilles. How did this mortal man end up marrying a goddess, a very unusual thing that only happened a very few times? As is usual with mythology, there are a few different variants of their story. The variant I like to explain why Thetis married Peleus is that Peleus was just some guy. Hyginus' Fabulae also has a fascinating bit of backstory for this event. Ages before, back in the dawn of human history, the titan Prometheus had stolen fire from Mount Olympus and given it to humans. As punishment for giving fire to mortals, Zeus chained Prometheus up to a mountain, where an eagle would eat Prometheus's liver. But being a god, Prometheus's liver would regrow every night, and the eagle would eat it again the next day. That sounds miserable. Hyginus specifies that this goes on for 30,000 years, a strange and specific amount of time, linking the dawn of humanity to the age of heroes in which the marriage of Peleus and Thetis is set. Among his other divine attributes, Prometheus was a god of forethought. He could see into the future in a way different from the other gods. Fast forward 30,000 years, and Prometheus lets it be known that he's just foreseen something very interesting, something which would threaten Zeus's rule of the cosmos. Zeus gets word of this, and he's eager to hear. Remember, Zeus came to his rule through violence. He defeated his own father, and having faced coup attempts before, Zeus is always a little on edge that someone will come along after him someday. Prometheus will only share his prophecy with Zeus if he's freed from this 30,000 years of torture. Zeus agrees to free Prometheus, and Prometheus lets Zeus know that, hey, Thetis, that sea goddess you're interested in? Yeah, she's fated to have a son who's greater than his father. This news puts a damper on Zeus's romantic interests in Thetis. A more powerful son is not what Zeus wants. He knows from firsthand experience what a more powerful son can do to a father. And Zeus doesn't want any other gods getting involved with her either. How much more powerful than his father might the son of Thetis be? Threats could come from any direction. Zeus decides it's best if he marries Thetis off, quickly, to some guy, some human guy. And that some human guy ends up being the mortal human man Peleus. As mentioned, the one child Peleus and Thetis end up having will be Achilles. Peleus was a good warrior, but Achilles is the greatest mortal hero of Greek mythology. And all the gods were invited to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis. All except the goddess Eris, the goddess of discord. But Eris showed up anyway, and from the doorway threw into the party her own little gift, the apple of discord. This was a golden apple, inscribed with the words, "For the most beautiful." 3 of the goddesses at the party, Athene, Hera, and Aphrodite, fell for it, scrabbling after the thrown apple, each arguing that she was the intended recipient. She was the most beautiful. To resolve this conflict among the 3 goddesses, Zeus now chose what might seem like an even more random mortal man to judge which of these 3 goddesses would get the apple. Zeus chose Paris, aka Alexandros, son of the king of Troy, to make this decision. Aha! Now we've got the Trojans involved too. The setup to the war is almost complete. Choosing Paris to make this judgment actually wasn't all that random, though. Paris had previously been involved in bull judging. Think like at a state fair where animals are rated on various qualities. While a bull judge, Paris had chosen the bull of Ares over his own bull, thus demonstrating he was an impartial judge and gaining a reputation for fair judgment among the gods. For the beauty contest, the 3 goddesses, Hera, Athene, and Aphrodite, all appeared before Paris. Each goddess promised something to Paris if he would choose her. Hera promised to make him king of all the lands. All the lands! That's everywhere! And if that wasn't enough, Hera also promised he would become richer than anyone else. Hera seems like the obvious choice to me based on what she's offering. Plus, you're choosing Zeus's wife, who's not only depicted as kind of jealous herself, but you'd get Zeus's gratitude for keeping his home happy by choosing Hera. Next, Athene promised Paris she would make him the bravest man, and she would make him skilled in any craft. I suppose that's pretty good too, although, as king of everywhere and richest man in the world, you could just pay people to be brave and do things for you. I'd say Athene made the second best offer. Oh, and note that Paris has been asked to judge who is the most beautiful, but the goddesses are trying to complicate matters by bribing fair judging Paris. Finally, the 3rd goddess, Aphrodite, offers Paris the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, to be his wife. Helen, who you'll recall is already married to Menelaus. And as I'm sure you've already guessed, Paris chose Aphrodite's offer. Let's try to get inside Paris's mind a little here. It would be easy and tempting for us to imagine that Paris was thinking like an immature young man by accepting Aphrodite's bribe of the world's most beautiful woman. However, let's instead consider the possibility that he was simply following through on his history for being an honest judge, as it really is reasonable to think Paris simply found Aphrodite to be the most beautiful of the 3 goddesses. While none of these 3 goddesses had a reputation for not being beautiful, beauty was Aphrodite's specific attribute after all. And if Paris found himself in a predicament because he was just being himself and following through on a positive character trait, it wouldn't be inconsistent with similar situations that other characters in Greek mythology found themselves in. Mortals in Greek mythology are often put into situations where there's no way to win, and suffering just seems to be the lot of humans. Read up on Oedipus for an extreme example of someone set up to fail spectacularly by his fate. So, after choosing Aphrodite as the winner of the Divine Beauty contest, Paris then went off to Sparta to collect his prize. Conveniently, Menelaus had to leave home for an overseas funeral while Paris was visiting, and Paris took advantage of this opportunity to make off not only with Helen, but also with a bunch of the Spartan treasure, which wasn't even part of what Aphrodite was giving away. It's debated whether Helen went with Paris willingly or not. The Helen we find in the Iliad is vague on her willingness to have gone, but she does express regret about the outcome, regardless of how her presence in Troy came about. What's important to the initiation of the Trojan War is that the oath Odysseus had suggested now comes into force, and the kings of Greece assemble to take on Troy, with Hera and Athene backing the Greeks because they're upset the Trojan prince Paris sided against them in the beauty contest, and Aphrodite backing the Trojans in gratitude. Various ties of loyalty and kinship mean that eventually all the gods end up supporting one side or the other. The key players, in addition to the three goddesses in the beauty contest, are Poseidon, who sides with the Greeks, Apollo, who sides with the Trojans, and Zeus, who maintains a balance between the two sides, with his mood and his interest in fulfilling the fates of the various mortals tipping the scales of his judgment back and forth throughout the Iliad and indeed throughout the whole war. So that's your 2-paragraph crash course setting the stage for the Iliad, which opens with "Sing, goddess, the wrath of Achilles, Peleus' son, the ruinous wrath that brought on the Achaeans woes innumerable, and hurled down into Hades many strong souls of heroes, and gave their bodies to be prey to dogs and all winged fowls. And so the counsel of Zeus wrought out its accomplishment from the day when first strife parted Atrides, king of men, and noble Achilles." Right away, we've been given the whole thesis of the Iliad. It's about Achilles' wrath, his terrible anger that we're going to see flaring forth very soon. Everything in the Iliad is about Achilles. Even the parts where we don't see Achilles, it's still about him. Things will be going wrong for the Greeks because of a decision Achilles is about to make in anger. And yes, a lot of men will indeed be cast down into Hades, all because of Achilles' famous wrath. Who is this Atrides that Achilles is so angry with? He's the son of Atreus, Agamemnon, brother of Menelaus, who lost his wife to the Trojan prince Paris. Agamemnon is the high king of the Greeks, king among kings. Who then among the gods set the twain at strife and variance? Even the son of Leto and of Zeus. For he in anger at the king sent a sore plague upon the host, that the folk began to perish, because Atrides had done dishonor to Chryses the priest. For he had come to the Achaeans' fleet ships to win his daughter's freedom, and brought a ransom beyond telling, and bare in his hands the fillet of Apollo the far-darter upon a golden staff, and made his prayer to all the Achaeans, and most of all to the 2 sons of Atreus, orderers of the host. Ye sons of Atreus, and all ye well-grieved Achaeans, now may the gods that dwell in the mansions of Olympus grant you to lay waste the city of Priam, and to fare happily homeward. Only set ye my dear child free, and accept the ransom in reverence to the son of Zeus, far-darting Apollo. At the opening of the Iliad, the Greek leaders are gathered together in their camp, when a priest of Apollo by the name of Chryses approaches Agamemnon and the other leaders. Chryses is a local, probably nominally a subject of Troy and so an enemy of the Greeks, but Chryses is not here as a Trojan. He's here as a father. What he's here for is his daughter, who may be named Chryseis in your translation, or may just be referred to as Chryses' daughter. Like Atrides, Chryseis is a name that's really just a reference to who her father is. Similarly, you may see Zeus referred to as Cronion or Chronides, meaning son of Kronos, the god who is the father of Zeus. Chryses' daughter has been taken captive by Agamemnon. He's offering Agamemnon a generous ransom for his daughter's release. This was a very common practice in war at the time. You take someone captive, you give the captive back in exchange for some gold or livestock or something. So right off the bat, we get here into the weeds with some cultural practices that are alien to us in modern times in the capture and enslavement of war prisoners to be exchanged for ransom. Setting aside our feelings about how wrong this behavior is will be one of the primary challenges we'll face in appreciating the Iliad as modern readers. I'm going to ask you to go along with me and trust me that this behavior doesn't mean that these characters saw one another as bad people, because that is the standard we're going to have to judge them by. But if you can't go along, and it's understandable if you can't, then I get it. I will simply present the Iliad within the context of its own culture. And that's all I can do. Now, the other Greek leaders hear the old priest Chryses say he's willing to pay this huge ransom for the release of his daughter, and they encourage Agamemnon to accept it. Why not? He's giving you free money, and heck, maybe you end up capturing her again, and he'll have to pay up again. It seems a no-brainer that Agamemnon would accept the offer, and they all clamor for him to say yes. However, Agamemnon surprises everyone with his rough response to Chryses. "Let me not find thee, old man, amid the hollow ships, whether tarrying now or returning again hereafter, lest the staff and fillet of the god avail thee naught. And her will I not set free, nay, ere that shall old age come on her in our house, in Argos, far from her native land, where she shall ply the loom and serve my couch. But depart, provoke me not, that thou mayest the rather go in peace." By insulting the power and dignity of Apollo, the god this priest serves, Agamemnon has stepped over a line. Accepting the ransom would not have reduced Agamemnon's glory one bit, and it would have kept the gods looking favorably upon the Greeks. One of the few constants in Greek mythology which has far less consistency in its canon than we're used to with our more modern fictional worlds, is that the gods are always quick to take insult against their power, and you can count on them coming after you for an insult like this. The irony should not be lost on us that the Iliad opens with a request for the release of a woman in exchange for a ransom, and that this ransom offer is rejected. Prior to the events of the Iliad, the Greeks had offered a ransom for Helen's release, which the Trojans had rejected. Chryses goes off angry without his daughter and prays to Apollo for retribution against the Greeks. "Hear me, god of the silver bow, that standest over Chryse and holy Killa, and rulest Tenedos with might, O Smintheus! If ever I built a temple gracious in thine eyes, or if ever I burnt to thee fat flesh of thighs of bulls or goats, fulfill thou this my desire. Let the Danaans pay by thine arrows for my tears." So spake he in prayer, and Phoebus Apollo heard him, and came down from the peaks of Olympus, wroth at heart, bearing on his shoulders his bow and covered quiver. And the arrows clanged upon his shoulders in his wrath, as the god moved, and he descended like to night. Then he sate him aloof from the ships, and let an arrow fly, and there was heard a dread clanging of the silver bow. First did he assail the mules and fleet dogs, but afterward, aiming at the men his piercing dart, he smote, and the pyres of the dead burnt continually in multitude. Apollo hears Chryses' prayer and answers it. Boy, does he ever. He sends a plague upon the Greeks. First, it's just mules and dogs dying. But then, the Greeks themselves start to die. They're having to burden the dead, with the smoke of funeral pyres constantly filling the air of their camp. Here's a little more about Apollo to put this plague into context. Apollo, like all the Greek gods, is a complex figure and holds sway over multiple areas of life. Apollo is the healing god and father of the god of physicians, Asclepios, but as such, Apollo also holds power over disease. Listening to his priest and feeling the Greeks have insulted not just Chryses, but him as well, with his famed silver bow, Apollo attacks the Greek camp. The invisible arrows are the mythological explanation for how a plague spreads. And this plague goes on for 9 days before Achilles calls an assembly. Agamemnon is the high king, the acknowledged leader of them all. That he's not the one calling this assembly of the kings is telling of his character, a man more interested in gathering treasure than in the glory of war. Achilles calls the assembly because, as the narrator tells us, in his mind did goddess Hera of the white arms put the thought, because she had pity on the Danaans when she beheld them perishing. We will see a lot more of Hera throughout the Iliad. She's a very pro-Greek god and very vocal and reactive in her support of the Greeks, so it makes sense that Hera wants to get this plague resolved. And it also makes sense that it would be Achilles who she would turn to as her voice within the Greek camps to straighten out Agamemnon. Most of the major characters in the Greek camp were the kings of their home countries, the various city-states in Greece. That Hera provoked Achilles to call this assembly is telling of Achilles' character. He's proud. He knows he's the best warrior among them, and Achilles chafes to be ordered about by Agamemnon, who is a very good warrior, but certainly not at Achilles' level. No one is. We have here a warrior culture not being led by the greatest warrior among them. Strong personalities are about to clash. Once the leaders have all been gathered, Achilles speaks. Son of Atreus, now deem I that we shall return wandering home again. If verily we might escape death, if war at once and pestilence must indeed ravage the Achaeans. But come, let us now inquire of some soothsayer or priest, yea, or an interpreter of dreams, seeing that a dream too is of Zeus. Who shall say wherefore Phoebus Apollo is so wroth, whether he blame us by reason of vow or hecatomb? If perchance he would accept the savor of lambs or unblemished goats, and so would take away the pestilence from us. Achilles points out that they can't expect to win this war while they're undergoing a plague. If they even survive this double scourge and ever make it home again. To resolve the situation, Achilles suggests that they find a soothsayer or priest or dream interpreter to discover why Apollo is so angry with them. Notice that Achilles starts out assuming that it's Apollo who is mad at them. This isn't necessarily yet pointing a finger at Agamemnon's treatment of crises. It could simply be that Achilles has drawn the conclusion that any follower of the ancient religion would have. A plague means Apollo is involved because he's the god with power over sickness and over healing. A soothsayer or priest or dream interpreter would be needed because that's someone who has a special insight into the motivations of the gods, which was key at a time when every bad thing that happened was believed to be caused by any of a number of gods being mad at you for who knows what reason. A soothsayer could then deduce what actions they could take to appease Apollo. Appeasing the anger of gods was a major part of religion at that time. The soothsayer who steps forward is one who has been with the Greeks from the beginning. Calchas, whom the audience would recognize from other earlier stories about the Trojan War. Having been called forth, Calchas speaks. Achilles, dear to Zeus, thou biddest me tell the wrath of Apollo, the king that smiteth afar. Therefore will I speak, but do thou make covenant with me, and swear that verily with all thy heart thou wilt aid me both by word and deed. For of a truth I deem that I shall provoke one that ruleth all the Argives with might, and whom the Achaeans obey. For a king is more of might when he is wroth with a meaner man, even though for the one day he swallow his anger, yet doth he still keep his displeasure thereafter in his breast, till he accomplish it. Consider thou, then, if thou wilt hold me safe. Calchas, too, seeks protection from the anger of Agamemnon before he will speak. It's almost as if Agamemnon is known around camp to be quick-tempered. Calchas already knows he will anger Agamemnon with what he must say. Achilles commits to protecting Calchas, setting himself up against Agamemnon. Yea, be of good courage, speak whatever soothsaying thou knowest. For by Apollo dear to Zeus, him by whose worship thou, O Calchas, declareth thy soothsaying to the Danaans, no man while I live and behold light on earth shall lay violent hands upon thee amid the hollow ships. No man of all the Danaans, not even if thou mean Agamemnon, that thou now avoweth him to be greatest far of the Achaeans. With the reassurance of Achilles' protection, Calchas speaks what he's read in the mind of Apollo. Neither by reason of a vow is he displeased, nor for any hecatomb, but for his priest's sake, to whom Agamemnon did despite, and set not his daughter free, and accepted not the ransom. Therefore hath the far darter brought woes upon us, yea, and will bring. Nor will he ever remove the loathly pestilence from the Danaans, till we have given the bright-eyed damsel to her father, unbought, unransomed, and carried a holy hecatomb to Chryse. Then might we propitiate him to our prayer. As many of them likely already suspected, the plague is indeed because of Agamemnon's refusal to accept the ransom offered for the daughter of Chryses. But now that Apollo is so angry, simply accepting a ransom for the priest's daughter isn't good enough anymore. Agamemnon must give Chryseis back without a ransom and bring a hecatomb to Chryses' temple of Apollo. What's this hecatomb we've heard mentioned a few times now? A hecatomb is a huge public animal sacrifice where meat is roasted and eaten by the participants. If you think of this as a barbecue-based religion, you're off to a good start. We're going to see a lot of meat roasting in the Iliad, and precious little mention of any plant-based foods. Here's a little cultural tangent my reading took me on regarding the diet of Iliad characters. Barley is mentioned a number of times, sometimes as a food for humans, but mostly in the context of its ceremonial scattering as part of the animal sacrifice ritual. There's one mention of onion being eaten in Book 11, which I could recall and confirmed was solitary in an interesting old research paper from 1936 titled Trees and Plants in Homer by an Edward Forster, which said that there was indeed one, and just that one, mention of the eating of onion in the Iliad. This paper also mentioned that beans and peas together get a single mention, but only in a simile, not as an actual food being eaten by characters in the Iliad. Otherwise, we get some mentions of bread, and of course a lot of wine is drunk throughout the Iliad, but that's about it for plant-based foods. So it's not just their religion that was barbecue-based. The whole ancient culture was centered on animal foods as a sign of wealth. But keep in mind that the Iliad was composed for its listeners as a story about their glorious ancestors, not as an accurate historical record. To the original listeners of the Iliad, these frequent mentions of meals rich in roasted meats spoke to the luxurious lifestyles of these fabulous kings of old times. But now, let's get back to Calchas, that poor soothsayer who's just spoken the will of Apollo, which he knew would immediately enrage Agamemnon. And yes, it does. Just listen to what Agamemnon has to say to the poor guy. There stood up before them the hero son of Atreus, wide-ruling Agamemnon, sore displeased, and his dark heart within him was filled with great anger, and his eyes were like flashing fire. To Calchas first spake he, with look of ill, Thou seer of evil, never yet hast thou told me the thing that is pleasant. Evil is ever the joy of thy heart to prophesy, but never yet didst thou tell any good matter, nor bring it to pass. And now with soothsaying thou makest harangue among the Danaans, how that the far darter bringeth woes upon them, because, forsooth, I would not take the goodly ransom of the damsel Chryseis, seeing I am the rather fain to keep her own self within mine house. Yea, I prefer her before Clytemnestra, my wedded wife. In no wise is she lacking beside her, neither in favor, nor stature, nor wit, nor skill. Yet for all this, I will give her back, if that is better. Rather would I see my folk whole than perishing. Only make ye me ready a prize of honor forthwith, lest I alone of all the Argives be disprized, which thing beseemeth not. For ye all behold how my prize is departing from me. To start with, Agamemnon insults Calchas, recalling some previous interpretations of divine will Calchas gave him, which were also not good. The original audience of the Iliad would have remembered that this was referencing a couple of Calchas's predictions from before the war even started. One, that the war would drag out for 9 years, with victory for the Greeks only coming in the 10th year. Another of Calchas's predictions that Agamemnon surely recalls was when Calchas said that the goddess Artemis would only allow the winds to blow the army's sailboats towards Troy if Agamemnon would sacrifice his daughter Iphigenia, which he then did. So you can see why Agamemnon has a grudge against Calchas. As his tirade continues, it becomes clear that Agamemnon does not want to give up Chryseis. His argument is that he would lose honor if he were the only Greek king to have to make such a sacrifice. And so, in exchange, he demands a captive be given him to maintain his honor as highest king. Why should I be the only one who has to give up something? I'm Agamemnon. True to his word, Achilles steps up to defend Calchas, confronting Agamemnon. Most noble son of Atreus, of all men most covetous, how shall the great-hearted Achaeans give thee a meed of honor? We know naught of any wealth of common store, but what spoil soe'er we took from captured cities hath been apportioned, and it beseemeth not to beg all this back from the folk. Nay, yield thou the damsel to the god, and we Achaeans will pay thee back threefold and fourfold, if ever Zeus grant us to sack some well-walled town of Troyland. Achilles is saying to Agamemnon, there's no general pile of treasure and captives for us to give you a replacement for the daughter of Chryseis. We divide up our loot as we get it. But I'm sure we can all agree that the next time we come across some loot, we'll give you 3 or 4 times the value of what we're asking you to give up right now. So Achilles is sounding pretty reasonable to me, other than calling Agamemnon of all men most covetous. While that might be true, it's not likely to make Agamemnon compliant with the request. Still, so far it seems like Agamemnon is the wrathful one. And Agamemnon is indeed still pretty angry as he replies to Achilles. Not in this wise, strong as thou art, O godlike Achilles, beguile thou me by craft. Thou shalt not outwit me nor persuade me. Dost thou think to keep thy meed of honor, and for me to sit idle in bereavement, seeing thou biddest me give her back? Nay, if the great-hearted Achaeans will give me a meed suited to my mind, then the recompense be equal. But if they give it not, then I myself will go and take a meed of honor. Thine be it, or Aias's, or Odysseus's, that I will take unto me. Wroth shall he be to whomsoever I come. But for this we will take counsel hereafter. Now let us launch a black ship on the great sea, and gather picked oarsmen, and set therein a hecatomb, and embark Chryseis of the fair cheeks herself. And let one of our counselors be captain, Aias, or Idomeneus, or goodly Odysseus, or thou, Pelides, most redoubtable of men, to do sacrifice for us and propitiate the far darter. So Agamemnon has agreed to do what Calchas has said is Apollo's will. He's sending Chryseis' daughter back to him, along with the hecatomb. But as he goes, he issues a threat that if you other Greek leaders don't come up with something for me that's of at least as much value as her, then I'll just take something from one of you. And then he mentions a few names of men he might come and steal from. Agamemnon is not willing to wait for the next time they come across some loot to get his recompense. But for now, Agamemnon is on his way out, going to comply with the obvious necessity of returning Chryseis' daughter. At this point, Achilles could have just left well enough alone. After all, Achilles' name was only one of several names that Agamemnon had mentioned as potential targets for him to take from. But Achilles is prideful, and he can't let himself be talked down to like this. So he says, right back to Agamemnon as he's departing, Ah me, thou clothed in shamelessness, thou of crafty mind, how shall any Achaean hearken to thy bidding with all his heart, be it to go on a journey or to fight the foe amain? Not by reason of the Trojan spearmen came I hither to fight, for they have not wronged me. Never did they harry mine oxen nor my horses, nor ever waste my harvest in deep-soiled Thea, the nurse of men, seeing there lieth between us long space of shadowy mountains and echoing sea. But thee, thou shameless one, followed we hither, to make thee glad by earning recompense at the Trojans' hands for Menelaus, and for thee, thou dog-face. All this thou reckon not, nor takest thought thereof. And now thou threatenst thyself to take my meed of honor, wherefore I travailed much, and the sons of the Achaeans gave it me. Never win I meed like unto thine, when the Achaeans sack any populous citadel of Trojan men. My hands bear the brunt of furious war. But when the apportioning cometh, then is thy meed far ampler, and I betake me to the ships with some small thing, yet mine own, when I have fought to weariness. Now would I depart to Thea, seeing it is far better to return home on my beaked ships, nor am I minded here in dishonor to draw thee thy fill of riches and wealth. This is great stuff. First off, Achilles' response has some of my very favorite insults in the whole Iliad. Thou, clothed in shamelessness, thou of crafty mind are both really good. And thou, dogface, that is solid gold. Achilles is openly questioning Agamemnon's ability to lead now that it's clear in his mind that they're all just here to serve Agamemnon, who already takes the largest share of the loot. And that's not why Achilles came to fight. He came to fight, sure, yeah, for the loot. That's a given in Bronze Age war. But Achilles really joined this war because he views himself as the preeminent warrior of his generation, and he really was. Unlike many of the others here, like both Aias's, Odysseus, Meriones, and even Patroclus, who had all been suitors of Helen and therefore are here because they are oath-bound to be here. They're oath-bound to defend Menelaus' marriage to her. Achilles had not been one of the suitors. Achilles is here because he chose to join the war. And that means he can just as freely choose to leave, which he is now threatening to do. Foolishly, Agamemnon says he is not concerned with the threat of Achilles leaving. Yea, flee, if thy soul be set thereon. It is not I that beseech thee to tarry for my sake. I have others by my side that shall do me honor, and above all Zeus, Lord of counsel. Most hateful art thou to me of all kings, fosterlings of Zeus. Thou ever lovest strife and wars and fighting. Though thou be very strong, yet that I ween is a gift to thee of God. Go home with thy ships and company, and lord it among thy myrmidons. I reck not aught of thee, nor care I for thine indignation. And this shall be my threat to thee. Seeing Phoebus Apollo bereaveth me of Chryseis, her with my ship and my company will I send back, and mine own self will I go to thy hut, and take Briseis of the fair cheeks, even that, thy meed of honor, that thou mayest well know how far greater I am than thou, and so shall another hereafter abhor to match his words with mine, and rival me to my face. Remember when Agamemnon had left it up in the air who he would steal from to recoup his loss of Chryseis' daughter? It's no longer up in the air. He's coming for Achilles, and specifically a captive woman Achilles has who's caught Agamemnon's eye, a woman named Briseis. Now, the big question is, why doesn't Achilles do something? He's threatened to leave. He could just leave while Agamemnon's away. But no, Achilles is too prideful to scurry off into the night. Achilles is angry right now. He's angry enough to kill. His hand reaches for his sword. Grief came upon Peleus' son, and his heart within his shaggy breast was divided in counsel, whether to draw his keen blade from his thigh and set the company aside and so slay Atrides, or to assuage his anger and curb his soul. While yet he doubted thereof in heart and soul, and was drawing his great sword from his sheath, Athene came to him from heaven, sent forth of the white-armed goddess Hera, whose heart loved both alike and had care for them. She stood behind Peleus' son and caught him by his golden hair, to him only visible, and of the rest no man beheld her. Then Achilles marveled and turned him about, and straightway knew Pallas Athene, and terribly shone her eyes. He spake to her winged words and said, Why now art thou come hither, thou daughter of Aegis-bearing Zeus? Is it to behold the insolence of Agamemnon, son of Atreus? Yea, I will tell thee that I deem shall even be brought to pass. By his own haughtiness shall he soon lose his life. Athene has appeared, visible only to Achilles. This is an eerie scene, and whenever I read it, I imagine that all the other Greeks are frozen in time, immobile like statues. After this scene, the others will show no sign that they had any awareness of Athene's presence, nor of the passage of any time, and they are certainly unaware of the conversation that Achilles is now having with Athene, which continues. Then the bright-eyed goddess Athene spake to him again. I came from heaven to stay thine anger, if perchance thou wilt hearken to me, being sent forth of the white-armed goddess Hera, that loveth you twain alike and careth for you. Go to now, cease from strife, and let not thine hand draw the sword, yet with words indeed revile him, even as it shall come to pass. For thus will I say to thee, and so it shall be fulfilled. Hereafter shall goodly gifts come to thee, yea, in threefold measure, by reason of this despite. Hold thou thine hand, and hearken to us. And Achilles, fleet of foot, made answer, and said to her, Goddess, needs must a man observe the saying of you twain, even though he be very wroth at heart, for so is the better way. Whosoever obeyeth the gods, to him they gladly hearken. He said, and stayed his heavy hand on the silver hilt, and thrust the great sword back into the sheath, and was not disobedient to the saying of Athene. And she forthwith was departed to Olympus, to the other gods in the palace of Aegis-bearing Zeus. This is why Achilles neither kills Agamemnon nor abandons the war. Athene is another of the very pro-Greek gods, and she often works in concert with Hera, which is what's happening here. Hera has sent Athene to try to stop Achilles from killing Agamemnon, and she offers to Achilles the promise of treasure worth 3 times what's being taken from him now by Agamemnon. This intervention by the gods, like so many we will see throughout the Iliad, is designed to keep fate on its tracks. Agamemnon is not fated to die today, nor by Achilles' hands. And other events, more specifically the deaths of other characters, are fated to come about because of this feud between Achilles and Agamemnon. Fate is, by the way, largely concerned with the timing and manner of mortals' deaths. Athene disappears. During that interim, the little bubble of time that only he and Athene shared, Achilles came up with a new plan on how he's going to deal with Agamemnon. As Agamemnon's selfish actions have harmed all the Greeks with the plague, but the burden for Agamemnon's selfish action is being borne by the honor of Achilles specifically, so shall Achilles' new plan harm all the Greeks, but the blame for it will fall squarely on Agamemnon's shoulders. Here's the plan. Achilles will sit out the war. He has been the linchpin, the single factor keeping the Greeks in this fight. His absence from the battlefield will be devastating, and everyone will know it's because of the very public way Agamemnon insulted Achilles, and they will blame Agamemnon accordingly. Achilles now vows to Agamemnon directly, "Thou heavy with wine, thou with face of dog and heart of deer, never didst thou take courage to arm for battle among thy folk, or to lay ambush with the princes of the Achaeans? That to thee were even as death. Far better booteth it, forsooth, to seize for thyself the meed of honor of every man through the wide host of the Achaeans that speaketh contrary to thee. Folk-devouring king, seeing thou rulest men of naught, else were this despite, thou son of Atreus, thy last. But I will speak my word to thee, and swear a mighty oath therewith. Verily, by this staff, that shall no more put forth leaf or twig, seeing it hath forever left its trunk among the hills, neither shall it grow green again, because the axe hath stripped it of leaves and bark. And now the sons of the Achaeans that exercise judgment bear it in their hands, even they that by Zeus's command watch over the traditions. So shall this be a mighty oath in thine eyes. Verily shall longing for Achilles come hereafter upon the sons of the Achaeans, one and all, and then wilt thou in no wise avail to save them for all thy grief, when multitudes fall dying before man-slaying Hector. Then shalt thou tear thy heart within thee for anger that thou didst in no wise honor the best of the Achaeans." So said Pelides, and dashed to the earth the staff studded with golden nails, and himself sat down, and over against him Atrides waxed furious. At the end of this mighty oath, Achilles dashed to the ground the wooden scepter that the leaders use to indicate who has the authority to speak at any given moment, and he sits down and he sulks. And Agamemnon looms over him, furious. Now between these two comes Nestor, the most elderly of the Greek leaders. He's the king of Pylos, on the far west of the Peloponnesus. We'll see him throughout the Iliad, interjecting here and there with his long-winded advice. Then in their midst rose up Nestor, pleasant of speech, the clear-voiced orator of the Pylians, he from whose tongue flowed discourse sweeter than honey. 2 generations of mortal men already had he seen perish, that had been of old time born and nurtured with him in goodly Pylos, and he was king among the 3rd. He of good intent made harangue to them, and said, "Alas, of a truth, sore lamentation cometh upon the land of Achaia. Verily Priam would be glad, and Priam's sons, and all the Trojans would have great joy of heart, were they to hear all this tale of strife between you twain that are chiefest of the Danaans in council, and chiefest in battle. Nay, hearken to me, you are younger both than I. Of old days held I converse with men better even than you, and never did they make light of me. Yea, I never beheld such warriors, nor shall behold, as were Perithoos and Dryas, shepherd of the host, and Caeneus, and Exadios, and godlike Polyphemos, and Theseus, son of Aegeus, like to the immortals. Mightiest of growth were they of all men upon the earth. Mightiest they were, and with the mightiest fought they, even the wild tribes of the mountain caves, and destroyed them utterly. And with these I held converse, being come from Pylos, from a distant land afar, for of themselves they summoned me. So I played my part in fight, and with them could none of men that are now on earth do battle. And they laid to heart my counsels, and hearkened to my voice. Even so hearken ye also, for better is it to hearken. Never do thou, though thou art very great, seize from him his damsel, but leave her as she was given at the first by the sons of the Achaeans, to be a meed of honor. Nor do thou, son of Peleus, think to strive with a king, might against might, seeing that no common honor pertaineth to a sceptred king, to whom Zeus apportioneth glory. Though thou be strong, and a goddess mother bear thee, yet his is a greater place, for he is king over more. And thou, Atreides, abate thy fury. Nay, it is even I that beseech thee to let go thine anger with Achilles, who is made unto all the Achaeans a mighty bulwark of evil war. Nestor starts off by pointing out how happy Priam, the king of Troy, would be to learn of this infighting among the Greeks. I especially enjoy the translator's use of the phrase made harangue, which I think is a really perfect word for how Nestor speaks, as long as we keep in mind that this word's definition used to be a little less negative than it is now, and a little more blustery and off the cuff. Currently, a harangue is defined as a lengthy and aggressive speech, and that's not quite what the translator of this edition meant. I have a dictionary I refer to for these older texts, the 1947 Winston, which defines harangue as a noisy, ranting, public oration, usually delivered extemporaneously. That's Nestor right there perfectly. We'll get many more harangues from Nestor as the Iliad continues. Now, Nestor just gave Achilles and Agamemnon a lengthy recollection of the heroes of the previous generations that he had known, whom he calls better men even than you, which I'm reading without an insulting tone. I think he's just bragging about all the amazing people he's known and been respected by, and therefore, by extension, how much you all here should pay attention to me and the wisdom I've gained over my long years. Ultimately, though, Nestor's advice doesn't really add up to all that much. He wants Achilles to not try to make himself seem better than Agamemnon, who has a higher station in their hierarchy, and he wants Agamemnon to be nicer and not take any captives away from anyone else. Let's not imagine that Nestor has solved the conflict at the heart of the Iliad moments after it's erupted. We've got 23 more books to go after this one. Agamemnon hand waves an agreement to Nestor, but really focuses more on the challenge to his authority he perceives coming from Achilles. Yea, verily, old man, all this thou sayest is according unto right. But this fellow would be above all others. He would be lord of all, and king among all, and captain to all, wherein I deem none will hearken to him. Though the immortal gods made him a spearman, do they therefore put revilings in his mouth for him to utter? Achilles doesn't even respond to Nestor. He addresses Agamemnon only in his response, whom he says he will no longer obey after returning Briseis. Yea, I should be called coward and man of naught, if I yield to thee in every matter, howsoe'er thou bid. To others give now thine order. Not to me play master, for thee I deem that I shall no more obey. This, moreover, will I say to thee, and do thou lay it to thy heart. Know that not by violence will I strive for the damsel's sake, neither with thee nor any other. Ye gave, and ye have taken away. But of all else that is mine beside my fleet black ship, thereof shalt thou not take anything, or bear it away against my will. Yea, go to now, make trial, that all these may see, forthwith thy dark blood shall gush about my spear. Achilles is telling Agamemnon, no, I won't fight you over Briseis. You awarded her to me out of what we all took as a group, and as a high king, it's your right to distribute rewards, Agamemnon. But if you come after anything else of mine, I will straight up kill you. Try me right now, and my spear will be drenched in your blood. And now, let's talk about all the spoils of war, quote unquote, which I'll refer euphemistically to throughout this series as looting and loot, although I certainly recognize that actual humans, such as Chrysias and Briseis, are among these spoils of war or loot, and that's very obviously problematic. The central conflict of the Iliad, which is being set up right here in Book 1, seems to be a conflict about who gets what loot. But it only seems to be about loot. It's really about honor. And the loot is just how honor is very directly measured. Captives, like the woman Chrysias, or Chryses' daughter, who is being returned to her father by Agamemnon, and the woman Briseis, who is a captive of Achilles that Agamemnon has threatened to take away from Achilles to compensate himself, are just a few of the many captive people we will see in the Iliad, although these two women are the most important ones to the story. We'll have to group captive people along everything else taken, which also includes animals, goods, treasure, anything that wasn't nailed down. There was a cultural concept in ancient Greece called time, spelled in English T-I-M-E, pronounced time. And time is the respectability or honor accrued for accomplishments. Time is directly represented by the things won in battle: armor, treasures, animals, even captive people. And if you lose the things, you lose the time. You lose that much honor, exactly that much. And they had a very good sense of the market value of all things. So when Agamemnon loses the daughter of Chryses, he loses one captive person's worth of honor. Theirs was not a culture that had much symbolic representation for honor. Printing out a certificate to frame on a wall would not be a thing to them. That would just be a piece of paper. It would have no value. It would convey no time. By being asked to give up his captive, Agamemnon is being asked to publicly dishonor himself. And he is seeking to rectify this dishonor by taking Briseis from Achilles. But in turn, Achilles is now being publicly dishonored instead. Keep in mind, to appreciate the Iliad, we don't have to sympathize with this trade in captive persons. We really don't. But we do have to understand it. And this is one of the most challenging parts of interpreting the Iliad for us as modern readers. If we make the effort to understand intellectually the cultural beliefs and practices of the time, we can come to see why the characters are feeling and acting the ways that they are. And then we can judge them by the same standards they judged one another by, which is the only fair way we can proceed with these characters. It might help if we think about the ways in which we are trapped and coerced into participating in wrongs by our own cultures. How many of us have had a net negative effect on the environment? How many of us have a carbon footprint that's made the climate worse? I spent years driving 60 miles each way to and from work because that was the only job I could get that would pay enough for me to keep up with my rent and student loans. I'm sure we've all made the world a little worse in some ways unintentionally because we didn't have a choice, even as we're trying to make it better through the choices we do have open to us. And I'm here reaping what I've sown with the rest of you, with wildfires and a warming earth and plastic junk washing ashore. Like us, the characters in the Iliad will all face serious consequences for their actions, both those they chose and those their fates forced them into. The Nostoi, which was a whole group of stories of the Greek heroes' mostly tragic returns to Greece after the Trojan War, proves this point. And if you follow me after the Iliad to the Odyssey, you will see that Odysseus's happy homecoming is bought only with another 10 years of suffering and blood, with the final battle taking place within his own home. We'll also eventually make it to the Aeneid, which tells its own story about the fate of the Trojans after the war. I don't think you have to feel any emotional sympathy with Agamemnon here. He's pompous and arrogant and not much of a leader by any standard. Agamemnon is not even the character you're supposed to be rooting for. Achilles is a hero of this story. Here he is, challenging authority, but pressed into doing so by the goddesses Hera and Athene, and by his own pride and anger. Achilles is an imperfect hero, an emotionally and morally complex one. He wouldn't be a very interesting protagonist if he didn't have a journey of growth that we're going to accompany him on. And the Achilles we're meeting right here is the one at the beginning of this emotional arc. Keep this Achilles in mind and contrast him with the very different one we'll see in Book 24. But it is worth making some effort to also see Agamemnon's point of view in the light of his culture and times and the peers he's among, because the conflict at the heart of the Iliad is being set up here, right before our eyes. Now, when the twain, that is, Achilles and Agamemnon, had thus finished the battle of violent words, they stood up and dissolved the assembly beside the Achaean ships. Pelides went his way to the huts, and trim ships with Menoetius' son and his company, and Atreides launched a fleet ship on the sea, and picked 20 oarsmen therefore, and embarked the hecatomb for the god, and brought Chryses of the fair cheeks, and set her therein, and Odysseus of many devices went to be their captain. So Achilles goes off now to his own portion of the Greek camp. The Menoetius' son referred to here as Patroclus, Achilles' closest friend, and in some interpretations of the Iliad, male lover. I won't insist on either interpretation, friend or lover, although as we get deep into the Iliad, you'll see that their relationship is most certainly more than just a friendship. Patroclus is central to Achilles' life and eventually becomes central to the main plot of the Iliad, but it will be a while before we get to that point. Agamemnon, just to clarify the passage I read, is not accompanying the mission to the priest of Apollo. When it says he embarked the hecatomb for the god, he just authorized the offerings to be placed into the boat. Agamemnon is sending Odysseus to complete the sacrifice. As we'll see shortly, Agamemnon's mind right now is entirely on nabbing the woman Briseis away from Achilles. Oh, and let's talk a little about the layout of the camp, since with Achilles going to his portion of the camp, we're moving for the first time beyond this initial meeting place of the Greek leaders. The camp can be thought of as stretched along a beach, with the ships drawn up onto the shore. You'll see me hear the word huts a lot during this podcast. The Greeks had all apparently built semi-permanent living structures on the beach, which in the original Greek text are called kleisiae, a word that seems to imply a building that may have had a pitched thatch roof. You can read more about these structures in the paper by Knox titled Huts and Farm Buildings in Homer, which I've placed in the show notes. Keep in mind, this siege has been going on for years at this point, and that most of the people we'll be talking about are the leaders of the Greeks, the kings of their respective home city-states. So they're living in relative luxury. In all likelihood, a lot of the common soldiers were sleeping either outside or in tents, but we won't hear much about common soldiers. The Iliad is very much focused on the exploits of the noblemen. As we'll learn in Book 2, each of these kings has come to Troy with multiple, in some cases numerous ships full of men. And a given king's ships are pulled up on the beach all in a single area. So there's a region of Achilles' huts and ships and men on one part of the beach, Agamemnon's area elsewhere, and so forth. If you look in the show notes under resources, items 2 and 3 show maps of the camp depicting where each king's ships are along the beach, with Ajax at one end, Achilles on the other, and Odysseus in the center, and various other kings filling in the gaps between them. Item 1 under resources shows an alternate way of depicting the geography around the camp as being on a spit of land rather than along an open stretch of beach. The layout of the camp would be the same in this formation, with Ajax at one end and Achilles at the other. The difference is that it's easier to imagine the camp being defensible this way, since they would only have to prevent the Trojans from accessing a narrow strip of land that attaches to the mainland, rather than defending an entire long stretch of beach. As we proceed into the Iliad, there will be times when imagining one geography around the camp versus another will make more sense. And I think you just have to kind of be flexible envisioning the camp. Let's get back to Agamemnon now, who's focused on getting even for the loss of the priest's daughter and getting even with Achilles for challenging his authority. And so, Agamemnon ceased not from the strife wherewith he threatened Achilles at the first. He spoke to Talthybios and Eurybates, that were his heralds and nimble squires. Go ye to the tent of Achilles, Peleus' son, and take Briseis of the fair cheeks by the hand, and lead her hither. And if he give her not, then I will myself go, and more with me, and seize her, and that will be yet more grievous for him. In addition to not participating in the sacrifices to Apollo to rectify the plague that he, Agamemnon, brought upon the Greeks, Agamemnon now also chickens out of going to Achilles himself to claim the woman Briseis from him. Instead, Agamemnon sends two underlings to do the dirty work. These heralds, Talthybios and Eurybates, two guys who must have been quaking in their Bronze Age boots, worrying about how Achilles would receive them after the thunderous oath he'd just made in the assembly. Unwillingly went they along the beach of the unvintaged sea, and came to the huts and ships of the Myrmidons. Him, Achilles, found they sitting beside his hut and black ship. Nor when he saw them was Achilles glad. So they, in dread and reverence of the king, stood, and spake to him no word, nor questioned him. But he knew in his heart, and spake to them, Welcome, ye heralds, messengers of Zeus and men, come near. Ye are not guilty in my sight, but Agamemnon that sent you for the sake of the damsel Briseis. Go now, heaven-sprung Patroclus, bring forth the damsel, and give them her to lead away. Moreover, let the twain themselves be my witnesses before the face of the blessed gods and mortal men, yea, and of him, that king untoward, against the day when there cometh need of me hereafter to save them all from shameful wreck. Of a truth, he raveth with baleful mind, and hath not knowledge to look before and after, that so his Achaeans might battle in safety beside their ships. Fearful, Talthybios and Eurybates say no word when they approach Achilles. But Achilles doesn't mistreat them. He doesn't even say anything unkind to them. However, he does hold them to be witnesses to his vow that the day will come when the Greeks will need the help of Achilles to save them from disaster. Talthybios and Eurybates now take Briseis away. With this dishonor having been done to him, Achilles goes off alone to the seashore, weeping and praying to his mother, the sea goddess Thetis. Mother, seeing thou didst of a truth bear me to so brief a span of life, honor at the least ought the Olympian to have granted me, even Zeus that thundereth on high. But now doth he not honor me, no, not one whit. Verily, Atreus' son, wide-ruling Agamemnon, hath done me dishonor, for he hath taken away my meed of honor, and keepeth her of his own violent deed. Now, when your mother is a goddess, your prayers get answered immediately and in a very personal way. Thetis appears in the mist and seats herself next to her son, asking him, My child, why weepest thou? What sorrow hath entered into thy heart? Speak it forth, hide it not in thy mind, that both may know it. Achilles starts off telling his mother she already knows what's on his mind. You are a goddess, after all. But then proceeds to tell her the whole story anyway. Thou knowest it. Why should I tell this to thee that knowest all? We had fared to Thebe, the holy city of Eetion, and laid it waste, and carried hither all the spoils. So the sons of the Achaeans divided them all aright, and for Atrides they set apart Chryseis of the fair cheeks. But Chryses, priest of Apollo the Far Darter, came unto the fleet ships of the mail-clad Achaeans to win his daughter's freedom, and brought a ransom beyond telling, and bare in his hands the fillet of Apollo the Far Darter upon a golden staff, and made his prayer unto all the Achaeans, and most of all to the two sons of Atreus, orderers of the host. Then all the other Achaeans cried assent, to reverence the priest and accept his goodly ransom. Yet the thing pleased not the heart of Agamemnon, son of Atreus, but he roughly sent him away, and laid stern charge upon him. So the old man went back in anger, and Apollo heard his prayers, seeing he loved him greatly, and he aimed against the Argives his deadly darts. So the people began to perish in multitudes, and the gods' shafts ranged everywhither, throughout the wide host of the Achaeans. Then of full knowledge the seer declared to us the oracle of the Far Darter. Forthwith I first bade propitiate the god, but wrath gat hold upon Atreus' son thereat, and anon he stood up and spake a threatening word that hath now been accomplished. Her the glancing-eyed Achaeans are bringing on their fleet ship to Chryse, and bear with them offerings to the king. And the other, but now the heralds, went and took from my hut even the daughter of Briseis, whom the sons of the Achaeans gave me. This is Achilles' summary of the events so far to his mother. But next, he makes his prayer to Thetis, asking her to go to Zeus and call in the favor Achilles knows Zeus owes his mother. Because Achilles sitting out the war is only part one of Achilles' plan to show Agamemnon he messed with the wrong hero. Achilles is going to get divine help next, and for that he needs his mother to call in the favor that Zeus owes her. The story of why Zeus owes Thetis a favor is worth getting into here. It's important to understanding Thetis' character and also Zeus's insecurity. In his prayer, Achilles will refer to the time when 3 Olympian gods attempted a coup against Zeus to unseat him from his throne, and the coup was perpetrated by none other than Zeus's wife Hera, his brother Poseidon, and his daughter Athene, and they actually managed to get Zeus all tied up. It was Thetis who saw Zeus tied up and called forth one of the great primordial gods of the underworld, Briareus, to rescue Zeus. Briareus was one of the 3 gods known as the Hecatonchires, meaning the 100-handed. It was with the help of the Hecatonchires that Zeus won the war known as the Titanomachy and first gained his throne. And it was with Briareus' help, when Thetis called for him, that Zeus was freed from his bonds, hence owing Thetis a favor now. Let's listen now to Achilles' request to his mother, and just how extremely he wants Agamemnon to suffer dishonor for the dishonor he brought to Achilles this day. Thou, therefore, if indeed thou canst, guard thy own son, betake thee to Olympus, and beseech Zeus by any deed or word whereby thou ever didst make glad his heart. For oft have I heard thee proclaiming in my father's halls, and telling that thou alone, amidst the immortals, did save the son of Cronos, lord of the storm cloud, from shameful wreck, when all the other Olympians would have bound him, even Hera and Poseidon and Pallas Athene. Then didst thou, O goddess, enter in and loose him from his bonds, having with speed summoned to high Olympus him of the 100 arms, whom the gods call Briareus, but all men call Aegaon, for he is mightier even than his father. So he sate him by Cronion's side, rejoicing in his triumph. And the blessed gods feared him withal, and bound not Zeus. This bring thou to his remembrance, and sit by him and clasp his knees, if perchance he will give succor to the Trojans. And for the Achaeans, hem them among their ships' sterns about the bay, given over to slaughter, that they may make trial of their king, and that even Atrides, wide-ruling Agamemnon, may perceive his blindness, and that he honored not at all the best of the Achaeans. So this is it. This is the prayer that Achilles makes to his divine mother, that the Trojans will become ascendant in the war, trapping the Greeks in slaughter amid their beached ships, to prove that Agamemnon was wrong to insult him, Achilles, to show how helpless Agamemnon is in war without Achilles. Sort of like It's a Wonderful Life, but with so very much slaughter. There will be so very much slaughter because of this prayer. You are not ready for how much slaughter. We will cover whole books of mostly slaughter. Thetis responds to her son in dramatic fashion. Ah me, my child, why reared I thee, cursed in my motherhood? Would thou hadst been left tearless and griefless amid the ships, seeing thy lot is very brief and endureth no long while. But now art thou made short-lived alike and lamentable beyond all men. In an evil hour I bear thee in our halls. But I will go myself to snow-clad Olympus to tell this thy saying to Zeus, whose joy is in the thunder, if perchance he may hearken to me. But tarry thou now amid thy fleet-faring ships, and continue wroth with the Achaeans, and refrain utterly from battle. For Zeus went yesterday to Okeanos, unto the noble Ethiopians for a feast, and all the gods followed with him. But on the 12th day will he return to Olympus, and then will I fare to Zeus's palace of the bronze threshold, and will kneel to him, and think to win him. Thetis agrees to present Achilles' request to Zeus, but Achilles will have to wait. Thetis says Zeus returns from Ethiopia in 12 days, which seems like a pretty random place to us modern readers for Zeus to be going to for his PTO. But actually, Ethiopia is a location that comes up with some regularity in ancient Greek mythology as a place that seems to represent to them the farthest edge of the known world, which it likely was. Thetis now leaves. The scene now shifts to the Temple of Apollo, roughly 25 miles south of the Greek camp, where Odysseus has arrived with the daughter of the priest Chryses and the offerings to the god. He will participate in a ritual offering to Apollo. Their religious rituals are fascinating to witness. As someone who is raised in the Roman Catholic Church, I see in the ancient Greek practices described in the Iliad echoes of the rites I was raised with, but here it's all so bloody and barbaric. It draws me in and repulses me at the same time. I find it absolutely spellbinding. Let's read. Meanwhile, Odysseus came to Chryse with the holy hecatomb. When they were now entered within the deep haven, they furled their sails and laid them in the black ship, and lowered the mast by the forestays, and brought it to the crutch with speed, and rowed her with oars to the anchorage. Then they cast out the mooring stones, and made fast the hawsers, and so themselves went forth onto the sea beach. And forth they brought the hecatomb for the far darter Apollo, and forth came Chryseis withal from the seafaring ship. Then Odysseus of many counsels brought her to the altar, and gave her into her father's arms, and spake unto him, Chryses, Agamemnon king of men sent me hither to bring thee thy daughter, and to offer to Phoebus a holy hecatomb on the Danaans' behalf, wherewith to propitiate the king that hath now brought sorrow and lamentation onto the Argives. So saying, he gave her to his arms, and he gladly took his dear child. And anon they set in order for the god the holy hecatomb about his well-builded altar. Next washed they their hands, and took up the barley meal. Then Chryses lifted up his hands, and prayed aloud for them. Hearken to me, God of the silver bow, that standeth over Chryse and holy Killa, and ruleth Tenedos with might, even as erst thou heardest my prayer, and didst me honor, and mightily afflicted the people of the Danaans. Even so now fulfill me this my desire. Remove thou from the Danaans forthwith the loathly pestilence. So spake he in prayer, and Phoebus Apollo heard him. Now when they had prayed and sprinkled the barley meal, first they drew back the victims' heads, and slaughtered them, and flayed them, and cut slices from the thighs, and wrapped them in fat, making a double fold, and laid raw collops thereon. And the old man burnt them on cleft wood, and made libation over them of gleaming wine. And at his side the young men in their hands held 5-pronged forks. Now when the thighs were burnt, and they had tasted the vitals, then sliced they all the rest, and pierced it through with spits, and roasted it carefully, and drew all off again. So when they had rest from the task, and had made ready the banquet, they feasted, nor was their heart aught stinted of the fair banquet. But when they had put away from them the desire of meat and drink, the young men crowned the bowls with wine, and gave each man his portion after the drink offering had been poured into the cups. So all day long worshipped they the god with music, singing the beautiful paean, the sons of the Achaeans making music to the far darter, and his heart was glad to hear. And when the sun went down and darkness came on them, then laid them to sleep beside the ship's hawsers. And when rosy-fingered dawn appeared, the child of morning, then set they sail for the wide camp of the Achaeans, and Apollo the far darter sent them a favoring gale. They set up their mast and spread the white sails forth, and the wind filled the sail's belly, and the dark waves sang loud about the stern as the ship made way and sped across the wave, accomplishing her journey. So when they were now come to the wide camp of the Achaeans, they drew up the black ships to land upon the sands, and set in line the long props beneath her, and themselves were scattered amid their huts and ships. Odysseus and the men who accompanied him spent all day long and long into the night celebrating their worship and sacrifice to Apollo, which involved not only the offerings of the animals, the roasting and feasting on their meat, but also hours of music and singing. Worship of Apollo in particular necessitated music. He was the god of that art and was often depicted with the stringed lyre. Hymns to Apollo were called a paean. I've placed a link as item number 8 under citations to a performance on YouTube of an authentic paean which was found inscribed on the walls at the great site of Apollo worship at Delphi. It sounds eerily similar to hymns I remember as a child, another strange echo of the religion I was raised in. Next, the scene shifts briefly to Achilles, moping alone on the beach, which I guess he does for 12 days, because we then jump ahead 12 days and up to Olympus, where Thetis meets with Zeus to present Achilles' request for the Greeks to suffer in the war. But Achilles sat by his seafaring ships, still wroth. Even the heaven-sprung son of Peleus, Achilles fleet of foot, he betook him neither to the assembly that is the hero's glory, neither to war, but consumed his heart in tarrying in his place, and yearned for the war cry and for battle. Now, when the 12th morn thereafter was come, then the gods that are forever fared to Olympus all in company, led of Zeus. And Thetis forgat not her son's charge, but rose up from the sea wave, and at early morn mounted up to great heaven and Olympus. There found she Cronos' son of the far-sounding voice, sitting apart from all on the topmost peak of many-ridged Olympus. So she sat before his face, and with her left hand clasped his knees, and with her right touched him beneath his chin, and spake in prayer to Zeus, son of Cronos. Father Zeus, if ever I gave thee aid amid the immortal gods, whether by word or deed, fulfill thou this my desire. Do honor to my son, that is doomed to earliest death of all men. Now hath Agamemnon, king of men, done him dishonor, for he hath taken away his meed of honor, and keepeth her of his own violent deed. But honor thou him, Zeus of Olympus, Lord of counsel. Grant thou victory to the Trojans the while, until the Achaeans do my son honor, and exalt him with recompense. So spake she, but Zeus the cloud-gatherer said no word to her, and sat long time in silence. But even as Thetis had clasped his knees, so held she by him clinging, and questioned him yet a second time. Promise me now this thing verily, and bow thy head thereto, or else deny me, seeing there is naught for thee to fear, that I may know full well how I among all gods am least in honor. Then Zeus the cloud-gatherer, sore troubled, spake to her, Verily it is a sorry matter, if thou wilt set me at variance with Hera, whene'er she provoketh me with taunting words. Even now she upbraideth me ever amid the immortal gods, and saith that I aid the Trojans in battle. But do thou now depart again, lest Hera mark aught, and I will take thought for these things to fulfill them. Come now, I will bow my head to thee, that thou mayest be of good courage, for that of my part is the surest token amid the immortals. No word of mine is revocable, nor false, nor unfulfilled, when the bowing of my head hath pledged it. Cronion spake, and nodded his dark brow, and the ambrosial locks waved from the king's immortal head, and he made great Olympus quake. Of course, Zeus grants the request. How could he not? The nod of Zeus is his promise, and when Zeus wills something, it happens. Now, even during this scene between Zeus and Thetis, Zeus mentions his worry that Hera will suspect he's up to something, and he's right to worry. Thetis now leaps back from Olympus to the sea, and Zeus joins the other gods, all apparently already seated together in the great dining hall of Olympus, where Zeus now takes his throne at the head of the table. But Hera must have been watching the interaction between Zeus and Thetis, and she's suspicious. The narrator depicts Hera as a very stereotypical, almost cartoonishly jealous wife. But if you read almost any Greek mythology at all, you'll see she has perfectly good reason to be suspicious of Zeus. He's always cheating on her, in some of the most outlandish ways. One time, he took the form of a swan to be with another woman. That was with the mortal woman Leda, and that's how he became the father of Helen, the woman this war is centered upon, who was born from an egg, by the way, because of the swan father thing. We'll meet Helen before too much longer. Anyway, Hera is a crafty goddess in her own right, definitely the most appropriate match for Zeus, and she'll have some moments later in the Iliad to prove it. For now, she confronts Zeus by saying, Now who among the gods, thou of crafty mind, hath divided counsel with thee? It is ever thy good pleasure to hold aloof from me, and in secret meditation to give thy judgments. Nor of thine own good will hast thou ever brought thyself to declare unto me the thing thou proposest. Then the Father of gods and men made answer to her, Hera, think not thou to know all my sayings, hard they are for thee, even thou that art my wife. But whichsoever it is seemly for thee to hear, none sooner than thou shalt know, be he god or man. Only when I will to take thought aloof from the gods, then do not thou ask of every matter, nor make question. Then Hera, the ox-eyed queen, made answer to him, Most dread son of Cronos, what word is this thou hast spoken? Yea, surely of old I have not asked thee nor made question, but in very quietness thou devisest all thou willst. But now is my heart sore afraid, lest thou have been won over by silver-footed Thetis, daughter of the Ancient of the Sea. For she at early morn sat by thee and clasped thy knees. To her I deem thou gavest a sure pledge that thou wilt do honor to Achilles, and lay many low beside the Achaeans' ships. To her made answer Zeus the cloud-gatherer, Lady, ever art thou imagining, nor can I escape thee. Yet shalt thou in no wise have power to fulfill, but will be the further from my heart, that shall be even the worse for thee. And if it be so, then such must my good pleasure be. Abide thou in silence, and hearken to my bidding, lest all the gods that are in Olympus keep not off from thee my visitation, when I put forth my hands, unapproachable, against thee. The mood around the Olympian dining table is very tense right now. Hera has confronted Zeus at a gathering of all the important Olympian gods, and Zeus is straight up denying having been up to anything right to her face. But furthermore, he threatens her with violence if she doesn't back off. He won his throne by violence, and with violence and the threat thereof is how he maintains it. Into this tense scene, Hera's son Hephaestus is about to interject in a sort of court jester role to try to lighten the mood, and he'll be more successful at changing the mood than Nestor was earlier between Achilles and Agamemnon. I say that Hephaestus is Hera's son, because in the Homeric depiction of Hephaestus, he is only the son of Hera. She had him with no father, as a counterpoint to Athene being the daughter only of Zeus that he birthed with no mother. But Hephaestus is an inferior counterpoint to Athene. The Homeric Hephaestus is lame and here very self-deprecating, unlike the Homeric Athene, whom we'll see is universally victorious and absolutely the most reliable god to have on your side. Let's resume this tense scene at the divine dinner table. Hera, the ox-eyed queen, was afraid and sat in silence, curbing her heart. But throughout Zeus's palace, the gods of heaven were troubled. Then Hephaestus, the famed craftsman, began to make harangue among them, to do kindness to his dear mother, white-armed Hera. Verily this will be a sorry matter, neither any more endurable, if ye twain thus fight for mortal sakes, and bring wrangling among the gods. Neither will there be any more joy of the goodly feast, seeing that evil triumpheth. So I give counsel to my mother, though herself is wise, to do kindness to our dear father Zeus, that our father upbraid us not again, and cast the banquet in confusion. What if the Olympian, the lord of the lightning, will to dash us from our seats? For he is strongest far. Nay, approach thou him with gentle words. Then will the Olympian forthwith be gracious unto us. So speaking, he rose up, and set in his dear mother's hand the double cup, and spake to her, Be of good courage, mother mine, and endure, though thou art vexed, lest I behold thee, that art so dear, chastised before mine eyes. And then shall I not be able for all my sorrow to save thee. For the Olympian is a hard foe to face. Yea, once ere this, when I was fain to save thee, he caught me by my foot, and hurled me from the heavenly threshold. All day I flew, and at the set of sun I fell in Lemnos, and little life was in me. There did the Sintian folk forthwith tend me for my fall. He spake, and the white-armed goddess Hera smiled, and smiling took the cup at her son's hand. Then he poured wine to all the other gods from right to left, ladling the sweet nectar from the bowl. And laughter unquenchable arose amid the blessed gods to see Hephaestus bustling throughout the palace. Everyone has a good laugh at court jester Hephaestus' expense, so I guess his plan worked because the mood is lightened, and Book 1 closes out with the gods all laughing and feasting on Olympus. I'll mention here that, as time goes on, we will see that not only are Hera and Athene on the side of the Greeks, but also Poseidon and Hephaestus, while the Trojans have on their side Apollo, as already seen, but also Aphrodite and Ares. Zeus himself, however, as the king of the gods, can be swayed and turns his mind this way and that throughout the Iliad. Here at the end of Book 1, Zeus goes to bed plotting harm to the Greeks on behalf of Achilles. And that's the end of Book 1. It's packed a lot in. It's a very story-dense book. We'll see some variation in that. Some books like this with lots of story progression, others heavy with battle scenes or other forms of content. Next time, we'll cover Book 2, which is a strange hybrid and not at all typical. Book 2 will start off with Zeus plotting and putting his plan into motion and features some really engaging debate among the Greeks, whom Agamemnon then marches into battle. And it ends with the Catalogue of Ships, which is the traditional name for that portion of the Iliad, which is, indeed, a catalogue of ships. And more specifically, a long listing of how many ships came from each Greek city-state, led by which leaders, and how many men each leader brought. The catalog is very dry, and I think a lot of people skip it. I usually go ahead and plow through it. You'll discover towards the end there's a catalog of the Trojans and their allies as well. The catalog of ships is certainly not essential reading, but it does serve to familiarize readers with some of the names they'll be seeing later on in the battle books, when names in the melee are flashing by quickly. Up to you whether you read it or not. Until next time, this has been Daniel with Your Mythology Book Club. Thanks for listening.